What does it mean to hear what is not heard in the world of leadership and business?
Wow. Okay. You're not wasting any time. To me, that's the most valuable thing that we can do, Jamie, right? I feel that if you want to hear what is not heard, that means you have to listen deeper than what you think your mind initially hears. You have to kind of listen with a sense of empathy, mindfulness, and compassion when people speak to you. And the reason you want to do that is because the vast majority of the world is not hearing what has to be heard. Most people speak at about 150 words a minute. Our minds go to about 600 to 1,000 words a minute. So we naturally are thinking 4 to 6 times ahead of people. And because of that, we miss about 50% of what is being said to us.
So, can you give a few tips about, especially at the beginning, how do you make people feel comfortable when you walk into a room full of strangers or people you don't know particularly well, where you want to make a good first impression through small talk?
Okay, I'm going to do the first thing for all of which our watchers and our listeners. I want you to embrace small talk. There is nothing small about it. If you read the research and the leaders that are quoted, yeah, big talk's really important. But this is what I say when I get my presentations. Famine is important. Is this what you want to open up a conversation with? Who wants to do that? Famine, war, pestilence. You start with, oh, have you been to this venue before? We've gone to fundraisers for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. What brought you here? Then you find out someone has a relative or a friend or someone's a survivor, etc. If you focus on what you have in common with people, where you are, oh, did you find a parking space? By the way, if you find a parking space in front of any venue in any city, you already have a conversation. You've got bragging rights because nobody finds a parking space in front of the venue. And I can hear some of you say, well, that sounds so insignificant. No, it is not, because it's the common issue. Even the weather. People say, well, I don't talk about the weather. Yeah, well, I live in San Francisco. We had atmospheric river rains. If you don't think people around the country were talking about that, right now in northern Italy, they're having major floods. People are going to talk about the weather. They're going to talk about what's in common for everyone.
I sometimes feel like when someone brings something up, and it could be my age as I get older and I've had various experiences, I will want, if someone says, well, I grew up or I'm living in Indonesia. And the first thing in my mind is, oh, I lived in Malaysia for a year, which is true. And, so it's a tit for tat, like almost like when someone brings something up, is it okay to not make it about us, but share our experience with what is happening for them? Or should we just stay curious and stay tunnel vision on their experience and not bring our own experience in this, to not make it so much about ourselves?
You know, if this person said they grew up in Indonesia and you lived in Malaysia, I think um, it would be flattering, and it would be affirming for them about you to know you know a little bit about that part of the world. And that would also say, oh, this person's not just a North American, a Canadian. He has greater experience than he knows. Um, we all know people that make everything about them, but sharing a little something so that someone else knows that they get you, I think it's flattering. I think it's reaffirming, and I think it's engaging.
It's engaging.
But if you do this and turn the whole thing about on your experience in your year and take over, that's a different story. But sharing that information,
Mhm.
and then asking them a question, I said, well, how long was it there? Have you been? There's just so many little things you can ask about. But I'm going to give everyone a caution. You will hear a lot of people, and this did come from Dale Carnegie, who was wonderful, but he was wrong on this. I know people, I'm the Dale Carnegie crushing his mantra. Don't just ask people questions about them. If you are only asking questions and not contributing a bit about yourself, your interests, etc., what you're doing is being an interrogator. And I know several people that do that. They go, well, let me ask you this. Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you. I was with two people, and one of them, that was her conversation style. When she went to the ladies' room, the other person said to me, what's with her? I don't even know her. I wouldn't tell her half of the things that she's asking. It's beyond nosy. And I'm from Chicago. It's like, I'll give you 4 questions for tradition's sake. But if you get to the 5th question and you've added nothing about yourself, I want to step back and go, what's it to you? What are you holding that information for?
People need to be aware of and have the confidence in that you don't always have to know everything. You can be prepared in a networking situation or when you see people, but like you said so eloquently, our brains have this exceptional, this almost unfathomable way of pulling out details once we've started, once we've had the courage to take the first step. Things will come to us if previously we really did show up and were present and not on our phone and not distracted. We really were talking with each other. And
And I want to just say this because I think it's so important. And it based on what you just said. Some of us wait for the perfect thing to say. Folks, ain't no such thing. By the time you think of the perfect thing to say, they're already at the other side of the room, if not the other side of the country. And so this is the Susan Rowan begging you to do this. Say something. And what you do when you say something, this is what I want you to do. Accompany it with a big smile in your face and in your eyes. Because as long as you say something, you start a potential conversation. Runners know this. People walking along the path, people always say hello to each other. What happens? The other person always says hello back. So don't wait for that brilliant whatever. And they did research on it. Best opening lines. And those of you who have paper and pencil in front of you, you write this down because you will be so grateful that it's written down. Hi, da 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 da, or hello. Hi, hello. You've opened up a conversation. Someone will say something back. Say, oh, I don't think I've seen you on this walking path before. Oh, it's my first time. Blah blah. Little things. Say something. Don't wait for the brilliant. The brilliant doesn't come, but it might come later. And do so with an inviting, warm smile. Now, I am going to say this. I wear a mask at a lot of places. I'm recently using a medicine that they said on my face, you're not allowed to have sun. So I make sure that I follow doctor's orders. So I always wear eye makeup because God forbid I didn't, but I try to make sure that my eyes smile and that I acknowledge and that they could even see a few crinkles. Kill me first, but they can, because they know I'm smiling. So I think there's so many efforts we can make. And again, underscoring, there's a difference between knowing how to work room and being a good networker. Knowing how to work room is walking into any room, meeting, connecting, making people comfortable, sharing a few words, sharing a few laughs, introducing people to each other, and coming away with a sense that, hey, I'm glad I was here, but I want to give you what your number one goal should be wherever you go. I'm not like other people. I'm not going to tell you, come away with 5 business cards, come away with 6 LinkedIn. I'm going to tell you what your goal should be. Go everywhere to have a good time.
I'd love to ask you one more question,
Sure.
which you and I have in common. And I didn't even realize the extent of the common ground, which I know from my own experience and even from reading your works. Finding common ground with people is another element that helps you bond. I'm going to read just a little bit about you, and I'm going to actually pull up your handwriting to show how there's a connection there. I might pull in my own story slightly, but I want to ask you about this with this final question. So, currently, like we've said, you are a best-selling author and a keynote speaker who's appeared in, hundreds, thousands, beyond magazines, papers, electronic, digital media. You started your career as a teacher, and you were a casualty of San Francisco's unified school district's massive teacher layoffs. And you even spent time in the unemployment line talking to others. Now, I also was a teacher for 13 years in total, a high school teacher and a department head. And I also was, I don't know what the term is. I had a tenured position, but the school closed down. It's a large private school, and they merged with another. So that was the moment where I actually took the leap with my wife's full support to go in a direction that I am currently now. And you and I never would have met if it wasn't for those series of events. So that to me was a pivotal moment of my life of how do you start a new career without connections, without financial support in a way that you could just, invest in starting a business. Where do you begin? And I've talked to so many people now over the last 3 or 4 years who are in maybe a decent position, who might want to transition to another one, and they're not sure how to do it, or they're not sure if they have the appetite for that level of risk, whether or not it's thrust on them, or whether or not they want to start from scratch like you and I did in our own ways. So I'm going to ask you a question, but I want to show you something remarkable. And for those who are listening or watching this, who might think, well, you're just matching, this is a certain level of bias. I know these things about Susan, and I'm finding the things in the handwriting. Well, they would be right that I am matching certain traits that exist in the writing, because what lies in the writing is what lies in the subconscious. It's not something that that you could have possibly known that I would ask, because we did not discuss this. But let me show you something, because if you have this trait at home and you're going through a career transition and you're not sure because you're a bit afraid and a bit uncertain of the where it will lead, this is the trait of resilience and grit that Susan has in the first letter. I'm going to pull it up again. In the first letter, you'll see the Susan. Now, there is on the bottom part of the S, it looks almost like I would call a bow tie, and it's a loop. There is a loop that goes back to the left. That's the past. And it shoots forward with a very strong level of ink forward. So it goes back to the past and it shoots forward. That is a leadership trait of someone who has grit, who, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going, as that 1980 song was. But this is someone who, when other people might have folded and they might have had a reason to, or quit on an emotional level, even on a physical level, because it takes so much to be resilient moving forward, Susan actually gets stronger. She reflects on the past and she shoots forward with this dynamic strength that is demonstrated also in the long loops in her lower descending letters. Those are like the lowercase g's in the fourth line that goes quite long and strong. And you see that in Maya Angelou, the late great poet and author and actress and thinker. You also see that with Terry Fox. Terry Fox, our Canadian, one of my great heroes of my life, who, when he found out that he no longer could run on two legs because he had cancer and they had to amputate, did the Marathon of Hope across the country. And only when the cancer got to a point where he had to quit, and he eventually passed away in his early 20s, but his level of grit and his handwriting is demonstrated in those long, strong descenders where the ink, it persists throughout. So you have, by virtue not only of your past in going from being laid off, I'm not sure the proper term for either of us, but we were told at one point, you no longer have a job at no fault of our own. And then you turn this into this magnificent career as an author and as a speaker, as a thought leader, like the real deal, like legendary in your field. I talk about authentic leadership in this podcast. You are the epitome, you're the quintessential definition of a leader in your field. And so I don't know if you take notes by hand or a computer, but if there's opportunities, even doing morning pages, the Julia Cameron style, right, of just writing whatever's on your mind before a talk, before you jump into a collaboration with your sister or jump into a research assignment of taking notes with someone on your young adult novel, it's writing those T-bars each time consciously. It actually aligns perfectly with building that confidence, that behavioral confidence, and reinforcing that goal.
Yeah, I also think what's interesting is that should I not be, because I'm not always handwriting, sometimes I'm on the computer, but now you've sort of put this in my brain. So the letter T now means something to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, again, like a trigger. It's like hypnosis or something, where every time you see the letter T, it reminds you to trust yourself.